Awesome. We've got Spain, we've got Canada, Houston, Texas. Oh gosh, Katrina, is it still hot? Texas, Austin, Sioux Falls. Hi, Mary. Always.
Wonderful.
That's great. Yes, that's my experience.
All right.
Connecticut. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I'll go
Over
ahead
to
and
you,
get us
Lee.
started. We're going to have many more people joining today, but I'll get us started so that we get you out of here also on time. My name is Renee Moorfield, and I'm CEO of WisdomWorks, a firm that is all about advancing the science and practice of well-being, really bringing that to life in brands, in cultures, and in leadership. And our team at WisdomWorks is absolutely over the moon, delighted to offer this webinar for you today, Leading Well in an Overstimulated World. And if I ask everyone to raise their hands, I think we could all say we can all relate to an overstimulated world, right? So that's what we're going to be exploring today. As I kick off the session, some of you have already started to put your name and your location in chat. Please continue to do that. This kind of webinar is a great way to connect with other people that are on a similar journey as you are, and that's a journey of well-being leadership. How do we create an environment where all people can thrive through our work, through our world, through the way that we lead? The pace of change and complexity has gotten faster and faster. Complexity has continued to increase. So, this topic of leading well in this environment, I think, is going to require us not just to find different ways of acting or operating or behaving, but different ways of being, of relating to each other, of relating to ourselves altogether, different ways of designing our work, designing our organization. So it's going to require something much more fundamental. And what I know about that is how important the well being of each one of us is, how it starts from within, because our organizations and our work and our world, our societies, are a demonstration of who we are and the consciousness we bring to it. So our well being is critical. So, to just get us started off on the sort of the well-being foot, I want to guide us in a very brief micro practice just for you, and by the way, just for me and all of these incredible panel members that are with us today that are going to be talking to us. So, wherever you are, if you could find a comfortable seated position, or if you're standing today like I am, make sure your feet are about hip width distance apart below. So, that would be right below your hips. If you're not sure what hip width distance is for your body, and a lot of people aren't sure, take your hands, place them together, and if you bend down safely and put those hands in between your feet, that will be about hip width distance for your body. So that's just a good check. And close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or find a stationary point on which to rest your gaze. We're going to do a simple breath practice together. It's one of the best ways to really connect in. Allow yourself to arrive all at once to this moment, to your own experience of your thoughts, your emotional state, and physical sensations. So perhaps you might feel the way that the backs of your arms press against the chair, or the way that your legs connect with the seat of the chair, or the soles of your feet connect with the floor. Now bring your attention to your breath, becoming aware of each inhalation and each exhalation, inviting each breath to become a little bit longer imagining each breath as a chance to reconnect with yourself and the quality of your presence in this moment. With your next breath, become aware that you are part of a webinar of an extended network of people and silently wish them a deep sense of well-being. Sending that sense of light and love outward to each person. And as you continue to breathe, allow that connection to extend to all sentient beings outside this webinar, wrapping that sense of light and love and well-being around the planet. And with your next breath, bring your attention back to yourself. Noticing the sounds in the room around you. Perhaps noticing the air on your skin, the coolness or the heat of the air on your skin. Just becoming fully aware of you, this whole marvelous human being. And if your eyes are closed, gently open your eyes. So again, welcome. And maybe I'm welcoming more of you now to this webinar, not just more people, but more of you and the quality of presence we can all bring to each other to this session. I am thrilled, absolutely honored about the panel members who are going to be speaking here today, and you're going to be introduced to them in just a second. But I'm also equally as honored by our panel moderator, Dr. Bruni Nazario. Bruni is the lead medical director at WebMD. Many of you know WebMD. It's one of the most popular online platforms, about over 75 million users a month. So an incredible source of health information and education. And as a doctor and a leader, Bruni is really known for building a culture of caring. And, you know, Bruni, when I was preparing for this and read that about you, I was like, oh my gosh, I've known Bruni for years. As a colleague, as a person, I can totally attest to the level of care and the culture of caring that you create for others around you and certainly have created in our friendship. So I just wanted to thank you, Bruni, for being here, and I'm going to hand the moderation over to you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Renee. I can say the same for you. We've known each other for a very long time. And honestly, you are, like many of the women on the panel, deeply, deeply inspirational. So thank you for having this panel. Good morning, everyone. As Renee said, I'm Dr. Bernalda Nazario, the Chief Medical Editor and the Chief of Medical Affairs at WebMD. It's really wonderful to have everyone on the call today. It's amazing. You guys are in for a treat today. We have an amazing group of panelists. If I were to describe them either individually or as a group, I would have to say, again, these women are deeply inspirational. They challenge organizations to wake up. They're passionate about the topic, and they all actively participate in integrating well-being into the workplace. So I want you to lean into this webinar today. I want you to walk away with the sense that you want to be a part of the conversation advancing well-being in the workplace. To begin with, we know workplace well-being is a critical investment to the community that we work in. I know that, you know that, research has shown it. It's particularly important in our leadership roles. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations dismiss it as having any impact. So let's talk about it. And again, I want you to lean into the conversation. In the end, I want you to be a part or have that sense that you want to advance this conversation with your community. Before we begin, I want to get some ground rules down. Just start with some ground rules. First, I want to make sure that everyone mutes their microphones. I will introduce each of the panelists and ask them each one question. In the end, panelists really focused answers limited to about 3 or 5 minutes. In the end, the attendees will have the opportunity to ask any questions that they have. And then I also want to remind folks that in Renee's world, in Wisdom Works, they're participating in research right now in the wellness economy. And if you want to learn more, absolutely, I think Kate is on the call. Kate will send out an email to let folks know. She's assessing a lot of the leaders in the wellness economy to the extent at which they are living well-being. So with that, let's get started. Our first panelist is Jacqueline. Jacqueline, you're on mute, so I want you to unmute yourself. Jacqueline McMenamine. She is an organizational effectiveness leader at Roche Pharmaceuticals. She works with different teams across the globe within her organization, and she helps them work together more effectively. My understanding, we've just recently met within the last several weeks. My understanding is that she's extremely committed to human well-being. Rumor has it that she's, and you correct me on this one, Jacqueline, rumor has it that she's a master's in Pilates. That is rumor, so you've got to correct that. But also, Jacqueline is doing a fellowship in spirituality. So wonderful human being. Jacqueline, my question to you, organizations globally have undergone lots of different transformations, not only during the pre-pandemic period, but also during this long post-pandemic period. Speaking on wellness, what are the key insights that we've gained from observations that we've seen as folks are working in kind of this virtual environment?
Yeah, so thank you. Thanks a lot. If I go back to February or March of 2020, when the pandemic was just picking up, and in the organization that I work in, there were two sides. There was one side that was looking at, we had to come up with the tests so that we could save as many lives as we possibly could. We also had to look at how do we ensure that the patients who use our actual products, that they still have access there. So doing all this in a virtual setting, because we couldn't go into the actual offices, proved to be a challenge that was completely new. What we saw, and I'm very proud to say, was that silos were broken completely. Assumptions that we had made in the past in terms of how we work internally and with different governments completely shifted, because we literally had lives to actually save. So what I want to share there is one of the insights was that when you're thrown into a situation where lives are literally being saved, all the boundaries just disappear, whether you're face to face or whether you are working, or whether you're working virtually. The trap, if I can call it that, is that well-being for that team, and I want to acknowledge that the whole team who were at the foreground, their well-being was being compromised, but they were also accepting it because they knew the big difference there. Another insight that we found was that we had to shift what our working hours were. Working virtually, as some of you felt, I was working longer, working virtually. Even though I was at home, there was no commute time, I was just working longer. And what one part of our business did is they actually said from 11:30 until I think it was 1:32, there were no meetings. So there was no screen time, no meetings allowed, so people can walk away. So an insight there was that we had to shift our working patterns so that we can accommodate and allow people to create space. to ensure that that they were stepping away and just doing something to make themselves feel better. The last thing that I want to share in terms of a virtual setting, we had a lot of leadership programs planned face to face. We had to very quickly translate those into virtual settings. Some of them we could not. But what we did is that in between transition time, we just set up different panel discussions because people just needed space to share what their reality was at that particular time. And then we converted some of our programs. A key learning there was that we had to respond relatively quickly. And then we also had to give people hope that in the virtual setting, we will do our best to ensure that their leadership development needs were also being met.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned two key words: help, hope, and vulnerability. As a physician, I worked in New York City during the peak of pandemic, and as a physician, we're taught not to be emotional. It will affect your judgment. However, as the pandemic continued to happen and the stress of the pandemic, the only way to work was to be vulnerable to these individuals and help them get through this journey that they were going through. So thank you so much. Our second panelist, Jennifer, good morning. Jennifer is the Chief Wellbeing Officer at Deloitte. She's a leading voice in workplace wellbeing and creating human-centered culture within organizations. She is also the host of a podcast series on the latest well-being trend called Work Well. She's the co-author of a book, Working Better Together. Jennifer, in your book, Work Better Together, you write about the significant tensions we face at work. We're more connected, absolutely, than ever, but we're also much more lonely. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to be here with all of you today. And thank you, Renee, for bringing us all together in this community. So this is such an interesting topic, an interesting question. I think loneliness was an epidemic long before the pandemic happened. And I think that the pandemic in many ways made it worse, but also kind of shone a big bright light on it. Look, and this just isn't at work, right? I mean, we live in this hyper-connected world. Technology is all around us. And that's not to say that technology is bad. It's not. And it's also not going away. So whether we believe that it's bad or whether it's good, it is here to stay. The thing with technology and the hyper-connected world that we live in is that we have adopted it into literally every aspect of our life faster than anything we've done in human history. And we haven't adapted to it very well. And so in my own words, I believe that the technology in many ways is using us. And we have not yet figured out how to use the technology to really augment and enhance who we are as human beings. And so we talk about this a lot in our book, that, the way that we engage with one another over technology. And certainly there are some incredible stories, like Jacqueline just mentioned, of living in this virtual or now hybrid world, depending on where and how you work, that we are using technology in ways that are combating loneliness. And I believe that it absolutely can be done. And I'm incredibly hopeful for that. But for most of us, technology makes us really transactional. And it removes the human connection. And it, in many ways, I know in my own experiences, especially when I'm busy or feeling overwhelmed or crunched for time, I'm very reactive using technology. And that doesn't always translate. We all receive messages and information in the state that we're in. And so if I'm having an off day or a good day, I receive things in very different ways. If you're having an off day or a good day, you receive things in very different ways. And that, that type of transactional, interaction that's created without kind of picking up the phone or being able to look somebody in the eye, you can't really hear tone of voice. You can't really say, wait, what can you say more about that? What did you actually mean by that? Or, have a conversation about it. And so I always tell people, especially with email, if you're responding to an email for like the 15th time, that's the time to stop responding and actually pick up the phone and say like, hey, can we communicate in a different way? And so look, I do think that technology and the presence of it in our life has certainly made us more lonely. I think I was very hopeful that as we started to come out of the pandemic and see people in restaurants, that we wouldn't see our electronic devices, but unfortunately, we're still seeing that. And I think there's been a lot of recent articles that I've read about how the pandemic has changed our relationships, and in particular, our friendships, because we have become so reliant and so addicted to our technology, and we spent so long without real human interaction outside of the people that live in our home, that actually what's comfortable is communicating digitally. And so sometimes communicating face to face or over the phone feels uncomfortable for us now. And so I think we just need to kind of break through that, if that is you, and it's certainly me, because I'm an introvert, so I much rather deal with something digitally sometimes than have to pick up a phone and talk to a human, but really kind of challenging yourself to say, okay, technology isn't the problem. It's not bad. It's just, how am I using it? And am I using it in a way that's beneficial to me and to all of the other people around me that I'm trying to create and build connection with?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Jessica, good morning. Jessica Grossmeyer, she is an author, a researcher, and the CEO of Jessica Grossmeyer Consultations. She's also a leading voice in workplace well-being. She is a researcher and has dedicated her life to studying evidence-based information and data on human thriving. Jessica, in your book, you mentioned that organizations can create support system for employee well-being. What do you think are the two most important cultural supports?
So thank you so much for that question. And as you mentioned, I have spent more than 20 years researching what is most effective. And the most recent study that I looked at was published in 2020, and it looked at more than 100 best practice workplace well-being strategies. And out of those, controlling for each one of them, we identified just 10 that predicted population level impacts on well-being. And all 10, interestingly, found the category of organizational and leadership support for well-being, which underscores the importance of our leadership behaviors. Whether you are an executive, a manager, a supervisor, or an informal team leader, what you do matters. When employees see you, each one of us, prioritizing our own health and well-being, they are more likely to feel supported to take charge of their well-being. Social contagion research is fascinating, revealing that our attitudes, our beliefs, and our behaviors have the potential to influence not just the people we're in direct contact with, but in fact, if you started to pay attention to what's going on 3 people removed from you, this research shows that if you start to practice better sleep, you practice more presence and mindfulness and other types of behaviors, you are more likely to influence your friends' behaviors. And that is demonstrated in research. One of my regrets when I was a leader some years ago, I was in a vice president role about 10 years ago, leading a team of researchers, and I wasn't walking my talk around prioritizing my well-being. One of my team members was a member of the organization's wellness committee, and I told myself I delegated that responsibility to champion well-being for my team and within the organization to this person, and so I was off the hook. And he would lead 10-minute walks outside of our building several times a week. He would rally team members to join him for a lunch break in our on-site cafeteria, take advantage of the on-site fitness center, take advantage of programs. And such actions built team cohesion and social support in addition to the well-being that was the focus for those efforts. And he would often invite me to join the team, but I always said I'm too busy. And I was terribly busy.
Huh.
But now I know better. My participation could have, it wasn't for my well-being that I needed to participate. I could have set an example for other leaders who also weren't walking the talk in our organization. And this is especially critical when it comes to taking advantage of mental health resources.
Mhm.
I actually worked myself at this point to physical collapse and broke my jaw. I
Wow.
was too embarrassed 10 years ago to admit to anyone that I fainted from dehydration and exhaustion. And in fact, when I went back to work, I told people I tripped over my cat rushing around to get ready for a pre-dawn flight. It was only recently that I published the true story in the book that you mentioned. And I've received so many notes from readers saying how important it was for me to share that story because it gave them more inspiration to start paying more attention and prioritizing their own well-being as leaders of well-being. And so my two cultural supports can be boiled down to first, do your own well-being work and recognize the outsized support and influence you have on the well-being of others, even if you're not in a formal well-being leadership role. Secondly, take a more holistic approach to well-being. I rationalized to myself that I was taking care of myself because I was training for half marathons and drinking fruit smoothies for breakfast. But I wasn't attending to other dimensions of my well-being, especially my mental and spiritual well-being. My book focuses on a more holistic approach, which recognizes the important role of these other aspects. And I'm happy to share more about that in the Q&A. I'll also be making available excerpts of my book to people who are interested in learning more about spiritual well-being and how to bring that into the workplace. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. It's interesting. Everyone has a story to tell, right? It's something that has connected us on the call today. And that's why we're all here. It's funny that you said you broke your ankle, you delegated the work to someone else. Later on, I'm going to ask us all kind of what we don't have time for everybody's story, but kind of what rituals, what are you doing to currently maintain kind of well-being, kind of walk the walk, like you said? Yeah, but before that, Renee, I'm going to ask you a question. Interesting, because I've heard you talk about the change in the term leadership. So given all the complexities and the challenges a lot of our organizations and even the world faces today, you have said that there is a shift in the meaning or the understanding of what it is to have leadership or to be a leader. What's the new definition that's emerging, and what do you think are kind of the key requirements? What's the mindset of that idea?
Well, thanks for the question, Bruni, and it's perfect to go after Jess with Jess's talking about the cultural support of leadership. You know, an old way of thinking about leadership that many of us on this call can relate to is that it's about a title or a level or a particular role. And those are still important in some context, particularly in hierarchical organizations. But even in hierarchical organizations, and in the organizations, in most organizations today that have moved to a very decentralized, very flat, very fluid kind of model, that kind of management thinking, while can be important, leadership has a whole different definition. It's about an accountable way of being in the world. It's about how we, each of us, use our life energy to affect meaningful results. I've always defined effective leadership as the ability to steward the conditions where all people can thrive. Because if we are focused on that, we're not just focused on the results we're trying to achieve, but we're also focused on how can we achieve those results in such a way that people leave the project, leave the work, leave the organization more refreshed, more capable, more well than when they came. The how is as important as the results themselves. And you don't need a title to do that. Everyone can be a leader. Everyone is a leader. It's a matter of choosing from the inside out that we will adopt that stance. I also think of leadership as no longer just about the me, like me as leader. It really is about the we. Most of our challenges are so complex that there is no way one person can tackle them alone. Absolutely no way. We need the wisdom of all people, and to really bring together that wisdom, people need to be operating from a deep place, a foundation of well-being. So when you ask about the requirements, this different kind of leadership requires us as people to care for our own well-being so that we can show up alive, vibrant, whole, well, capable, feeling internally well resourced to deal with all of our stressors and challenges. But it also means committing to the well-being of others, like Jess was mentioning. And it means that conversations about well-being with people within our teams are not separate from conversations about work. They are integral to it. They are actually a part of what's important for getting work done. And when you adopt this orientation, the impact can be really dramatic. And I'll give you one quick example. In one project, we used our assessment system, Be Well, Lead Well, Pulse. We measure 19 dimensions holistically of well-being, stress resilience, and well-being leadership. We use this with a brand team at Barilla, an international food company. Many of you may recognize if you eat the pasta, you recognize Barilla. Well, we worked with the Melina Bianco brand team, which is the bakery. They're head of all the bakery products. And this was in the middle of the pandemic. We measured the level of well-being and stress resilience of that team. We worked with that team over a period of a number of months to support them in really integrating and prioritizing well-being in a way that was unique to them individually, in their team routines, and as a potential activation for their brands to affect their consumers. So those three levels, individual, team, and brand. And then we used the tool again to measure the effects 1 year later. And after 1 year, 20% of the team members had increased. So there was a 20% increase in thriving and resilience across the team, a 43% increase in engagement and well-being at work, a 229, that number blew me away, 229% increase in the team proactively engaging in those pro-social behaviors that supported the potential of each other to get work done well. Those are behaviors like peer coaching, appreciative feedback, etc. And all of those increases came at a time during a global pandemic, which we are now still in, by the way, but at the heart of a pandemic, when all of us know the engagement and well-being of employees was really dive bombing, really going down, this team actually had increases in all those areas. So I think when we adopt this stance of leadership, creating the conditions where all people thrive, and we come from that place, so that means that's including ourselves, our teams, and our consumers through our brands, products, and services, it can have some really dramatic effects. And I think it's one of the most needed ways of leading in the world.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you something that Renee hasn't realized that she segued into. So she talked about kind of the changing term in leadership. You talk about a changing definition of workplace well-being. You describe it as kind of a strategically designed work and upskilling leadership skills with positive impact. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of a emerging thinking and research that we've been doing at Deloitte. But I think what you're getting at is probably a line that I used when we connected previously, but that workforce well-being is an outcome of strategically designing and upskilling leaders to positively impact well-being. And so we're looking at well-being as probably the number one, we call them work determinants of well-being. So the number one determinant of well-being is actually leadership, and who your leader is or isn't, and how they lead from a place of well-being, and the things that Renee was talking about. But things like legacy thinking, that well-being is something that only happens outside of the workplace, that it's not something that happens during work, or that we pursue during quote unquote traditional work hours. to now that work is truly a determinant of our well-being, especially given the way that many of us are working in this, virtual or hybrid, but even those that are on site every day, we spend a good majority of our waking hours working. And if it is something that is toxic or is detracting from our well-being, that's a terrible that's a terrible short-term outcome, but it's a terrible long-term outcome, not only for the individual, but also for the organization, because they end up leaving. Other things that we're looking at is that, well-being, and Renee, you just said this, well-being, legacy thinking is well-being is solely the responsibility of the individual. To well-being is now a shared responsibility. It's individuals, teams, and leaders within an organization that are all held accountable for creating and sustaining a culture of well-being. That it's part of the goaling and the performance management processes and kind of everything that we do. And I think most importantly is that we have to go beyond just looking at solutions that provide perks and benefits for people. Now, if you work at an organization where you don't have perks and benefits, certainly that is kind of non-negotiable baseline. But beyond that, the organizational structures that we work in, the barriers that we come across in just trying to get our work done on a day in, day out basis, whether that's operational barriers or technology barriers or people barriers, that too has an impact on our well-being. And so really starting to dig deep on the impact of kind of the workplace, and leadership, and how that ultimately either positively or negatively impacts our well-being. I think that Renee said it well when she talked about well-being as kind of an outcome of the work that we do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. So I mentioned earlier, we all have a story to tell that has gotten us here, and we're all here for a reason. I'm not going to ask everyone's story, but because we're running out of time and I want to get to some of the questions, but I would love to know, each and every one of you, what rituals, what practices help you, enable you to maintain, to live and lead well-being. So starting again with Jacqueline, tell us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So one of the rituals that I've developed, and it's from reading poetry when I used to have face-to-face sessions, is I now write poems myself if I'm stressed out, and it just grounds me, and it just allows me to shift energy. And I sometimes read those poems with people from work. So it helps me. And
That's beautiful.
And as Renee said, I'm also able to share them with other people. So
that's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Jessica, tell us a little bit.
So I have spent the last year and a half trying to walk my own talk around things I mentioned in my book. And so I could give you a half dozen that I regularly incorporate into my day. But one I think that is the most, I think, universally available to us is to develop a purpose and values ritual every single day. And so that starts by identifying what your purpose and values are. But then I pause every morning and I reflect on what that is. And I look at my day and I think about, how do I want to intentionally step into the opportunities presented to me to live out this purpose in my day? And it has to do with how I show up as a human. And then I reflect again at the end of the day in a 15-minute journal entry. Did I show up? And it allows me to calibrate and recalibrate every single day around, how am I showing up? When am I not showing up? And continually working on keeping in touch with that purpose and values.
I love that you're reevaluating, reassessing yourself on a daily basis. That's definitely a step forward. Thank you. Thank you for that. Jen, how do you keep yourself?
Yeah, so I have probably not surprising to those on the phone, I do work for an accounting and consulting organization, and we love frameworks. And so we have an internal framework at Deloitte, and I have my own personal framework for well-being, which is eat, move, sleep, and find joy. And I try to do a little bit of that every day. I'm not always successful every single day, but making sure that I'm eating some foods that are nutritious and fueling my body. That doesn't mean that I don't indulge. Movement is incredibly important for me. I exercise, and that's kind of a one of the things that I do pretty much 6 days a week, if not 7. But on the days that I don't exercise, just making sure that I'm getting out for a walk with my dog, getting in nature. Sleep, for those of you that have heard me talk before, sleep is a huge non-negotiable for me, so much so that pretty much everybody in my life knows that when it gets to a certain time, it's regardless of where we are or what we're doing, it's time for Jen to go to bed. And I tease my team, they tell me, oh, Jen, it's time for you to go to bed. And I'm like, that's because you guys know what it's like to work with a Jen that's not well rested. And that's probably absolutely true. And then finding joy. I just think that can be so easily lost, whether it's, whatever it is that lights you up, whether it's, music or your children or a pet or just going online. A great use of technology is going online and watching some funny videos sometimes just to, make you laugh and in the middle of the day. But I do believe that there days and days can go by in the world that we're living in. And if we don't intentionally seek out joy, sometimes it can be hard to find.
Yeah. Thank you. Renee?
Well, I feel it's always hard to go last because I want to say yes, 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 yes to all of this. And at first, I want to also call out someone who's on this webinar, Jane Cocking, who's a member of the Wisdom Works team. And the reason I want to say hello to Jane is because she also writes poetry. And I am always so impacted, and it's usually at the most pivotal times in how we are all working together as a team in our company. She will write a poem on an experience of that's been transformative to her, and it actually really affects all the rest of us. So the act of just sharing, your gifts is really impactful to others' well-being. For me personally, there's so many things that I try to do to support myself, but the most recent one, especially during the pandemic, that was new for me, is I joined a women's drumming group. And for the last 2 years, we've been drumming together, and it's a group, and we've been doing it outside because of the pandemic. So it'd be bitter cold. We're all wrapped up, and we've got mittens on, and we're out there drumming. So it's about an hour and a half of doing something that is so different from my work life, so immediate in that we are making a beautiful noise together, and so connecting because it's about 21 women who are in a circle, all ages, all sizes, all colors, all walks of life, and I it's just such a gift. We don't even know about each other's background that much because we get there and we drum.
Mhm.
There's something so connecting and grounding about it that it's been just something I'm so grateful for through this.
I
Through this.
love that. I love that. It sounds so spiritual.
It has been. It's been
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah.
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 Well,
Thanks.
we're ready to wrap things up on our end. Kate, I'm not sure that we have any questions that have been submitted. Are we
We
ready?
do have a few. Yeah, we have a few. We
Excellent.
can get us started, and I would just encourage anyone else to put them in the chat. And since we actually have time, I'd love for maybe some of you to ask them yourself. So Jared, I saw that you asked a question there, and I'd love if you could share it with the panelists.
Yeah. So the question I had was, I really appreciate the insights about kind of modeling well-being as a leader. I think I'm really sensitive to a lot of the technology that folks are experiencing, right? Email, Slack, all of those pings coming through. And I came across this idea that it's actually less about the technology. And I think, Jen, you said this, the technology using us, but more of a workflow problem. So I'm curious if there's like a well-being workflow that we might think about designing for our workplaces or our teams, in addition to all these great individual practices.
It's a great question. Anyone want to take that one on?
I can talk a little bit about some of the things that we encourage and that we do at Deloitte. We actually do talk about it as well-being in the flow of work, and really, encouraging. And there are some existing technology tools that will help nudge and prompt some of these things. But I think there are also things that we can each individually do and encourage our teams to do, like blocking time on your calendar looking at, how many back-to-back meetings that you have. I saw, Jared, that you mentioned Cal Newport. I'm a big fan of Cal Newport and his work, and especially his book, A World Without Email. But I think, really intentionally thinking about how we, schedule, not just schedule, but also kind of how we design and run and lead meetings, whether they be in person or virtual. But I always say kind of be really intentional about your calendar. If you look at my calendar, I really literally do have breakfast, lunch, dinner, 2 snacks, workout, and bedtime on my calendar, because that's how I schedule things into the flow of my day. But I put my day, I schedule the things that matter to me first on my calendar, and then I put everything else in between those times, and really encourage other people to do the same. We also talk about team behaviors and norms, because what it comes down to, I think, Renee, you talked about this, you can't just take care of yourself by yourself, right? This is a shared responsibility of all of us. And so having these conversations as teams as to what we want our working norms to be, what does it look like? What are our kind of standard working hours as a team? How do we connect with one another? To your point, Jared, outside of standard working hours, because always being connected to email or Slack or some other digital tool is draining people, but FOMO is also real. So creating kind of those norms and expectations, I think what, detracts from people's well-being potentially more than anything is unclear expectations, right? Not knowing what's expected of me, or when I need to be on, or when I need to respond, or how I need to respond. So I think having some of those real conversations and deciding what you want your norms to be is a good place to start.
Thank you.
I want to jump in and add to that, because I love everything that you just said, Jen. And the things that I would add are things like a principal relationship before work. Just having a principle, and that would be an operating norm for a team, relationship before work. How that might be demonstrated is when the team gets together, even a minute of a breath together, or a mindfulness practice, or a stretch, or a check-in. How's everybody doing? So just a proactive moment where those are sending messages that all of our well-being matters. And if we connect in this way, we get work done better together. I mean, and I can tell you from leading for many years now, that works, but also from working with clients, that works in measurable ways. So when teams come at an impasse, so Jared, I don't know if you've been in meetings before like this, but I have definitely been in meetings like this where you feel like the conversation is swirling, but it really is not getting anywhere. Supporting a team and developing the skills to notice that, to name it, and at that juncture to take a breath, take a walk, stretch, make that energetic shift rather than continuing to stay in a swirl. I mean, that may sound like it's just about team dynamics, but I guarantee you that opens up a lot of well-being and relieves a lot of stress. So those are the other kinds of practices. And then the third, I would say, is job crafting. Not all organizations can do that, but for some organizations to be able to say, okay, team, here's what we need to accomplish. Who is inspired to do what? And allow people to pick things that they're very motivated to do. For much of our work, as Jen mentioned, the work itself is broad, and we all need to accomplish it together. So can we begin to choose, and so that people are showing up to do the work in a way that they are truly inspired to do that particular part of the job? They're excited about it. And because doing work that you love is a huge well-being, adds a lot of well-being and energy to your life.
I would add the other practice that I do is, aside from taking breaks, scheduling, I actually put on my calendar one meeting for our team to get together. The agenda is blank. It really is just kind of a check-in, and it's that human connection again. If every meeting that I'm having with my team has an agenda, and we go through this set of, we've accomplished X, Y, and Z, the one most important thing that we haven't is making that connection as a team. So I find that that's probably I'm going to say the most productive, although we haven't really done anything, but it is the most effective thing that I find that keeps us working together and sane.
And I'd actually like to follow up on that, because that made me think of another question. Actually, this is to Jacqueline as well. You mentioned kind of the working meetings and shifting how you worked in the beginning, and also creating that space. And I wonder who was responsible for kind of leading that or making that space. Was it one leader? Did it come from the top down? I kind of think that's part of the conversation here, is who's responsible and how do we take that ownership?
Mm.
And you're muted, hun.
Story of my life. In terms of who was responsible, it was various people. What we did was that we created channels for people to share just how they felt. I would say that we listened differently. We had to listen differently because we were listening in a virtual setting. Whereas when you're in a room, you can tell what the body language is. How we listen is, are the videos on? Are the videos off? You know, how do people look? What kind of language do they do they use to describe what the actual what their situation is? It was a pilot to try it out, and what they found was that people just felt better. People showed up into the meetings after the break feeling a lot better. The productivity actually didn't go down, because at first people thought maybe productivity might go down, but productivity did not go down. But now that the pandemic at the intensity is now a bit over, what we do is during the summers in 2 of our businesses, we have 2 weeks where the majority of the businesses are not working, and that's as a result of something we did before, which we've decided to then extend it. So there aren't any big meetings during those 2 weeks of the summer, just so that we could give people the space to take a proper summer vacation. Yeah. So to your answer, it came from different perspectives.
Thank you for that. We also have a question for Trisha. From Trisha, would you like to ask your question, or do you want me to read it? I see you're on camera, so I thought I'd ask.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. This is fantastic. But I guess one thing that is near and dear to the work that I'm doing, I'm curious how the panelists may or may not be working on efforts to normalize discussions regarding mental health, specifically where you directly or within your organizations, you've had to deal with the tragedy of suicide, and how is, what's being done from a preventative standpoint too.
Yeah, Jessica, do you want to jump in here and get us started?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question, Trisha. It's one we don't like to talk about. It's uncomfortable. And, I'm in an organization of 1 right now, so I can't speak to what an organization the size of the other panelists are doing to address this more systemically. But I believe that each one of us, it starts with us. Well-being starts with us. It starts with me. And so one of the things that I've been really bringing into every interaction that I have, whether it's formal or informal, is how can I intentionally choose to practice authenticity and vulnerability in my conversations with other people. And anytime I have the opportunity to do a one-on-one with somebody, I have a lot of people reaching out after they read my book, they want to talk. And I always say, yes, I find a way to fit those things in. And I think very carefully about how can I be intentional and show up for this person in this moment. And so I think, one of my friends at Google, Newton Chang, one of the things that he has done as a leader is, as leader of well-being, health and human performance at his company, he went public with his story about burnout and started to share with others. This is what it felt like. I wasn't even realizing that I was experiencing anxiety these past 3 years. I had no idea that this is what was going on. And he stepped away from his job for 3 months. He came back and he started to share his story about, well, what does it look like to attend to burnout? What does it look like to shift your priorities? And he's back, he's firing on all guns, and he's sharing his story. And it's just so important for us to step over the fear and the discomfort of revealing who we are to other people. I think as leaders, we tend to think that that's a sign of weakness, when in fact, it's a sign of courage. And we create norms around mental health when we help people to understand that it's okay to talk about the uncomfortable things, and to acknowledge that, hey, this is uncomfortable, but we have to start talking about these things. And when you share your story, even if it's, it doesn't have to be something groundbreaking, but like Jane, you're role modeling it beautifully in the chat. You're sharing with us the circumstances of your life. And, it just comes down to that. Are we being real and vulnerable with one another? Because it helps everybody to say, okay, maybe I can share just that little bit more about myself. And we can start to incorporate it into, we've been talking a lot about meetings. In the previous organization that I was in, 7 people, 100% virtual all over the country. And our manager, who has a lot of emotional intelligence, started to build into, at the beginning of the pandemic, those calls. She would have us show something of ourselves more each meeting. And one day it was, run down to your kitchen and pick out your favorite gadget and come up and tell us why. It was a show and tell. So this doesn't have to be heavy stuff. But, sometimes you have to start with those things and just start to be like, hey, let's share one another with one another. We don't always have to have this facade of, agenda, transaction, tactics, goals, and objectives. We can make time to be real with one another. And so this doesn't have to be heavy, but it can be a starting point if you're not having those conversations now. And it sort of is something that builds, I think.
Well, thank you, everyone. Renee, I'm going to hand you over the floor because we are almost at our time limit. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, for allowing me to moderate. Thank you, everyone on the panel. You are incredible, really incredible and inspirational, like I mentioned earlier. And I hope our audience really walks away, again, really feeling motivated that they want to continue this conversation.
No, thank you, Bernie. I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate the way you guided us today. I really appreciate the question, Tricia, from you on mental health, because underneath, for me, it's all about how do we create organizations that really appreciate the fullness of human beings and the aliveness that we can be. I don't know that we've ever really created consciously organizations that tap in to human flourishing. And mental health is not opposed to that. It's part of that. That conversation about mental health is a part of this whole conversation about human thriving. So I just really appreciate you, Bruni, the panelists. Thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom with us. I want to give a huge shout out to Kate McIver. If everyone can clap for Kate. Kate has been our maestro in orchestrating this entire thing and did such a fantastic job. And thank you for all of you. This is a community of well-being leaders. This is a tribe of people that extends way beyond us. As Bruni mentioned at the beginning, we are doing a study that looks at the questions as people committed to leading well-being. How are we doing personally? So if you want to be a part of that study, feel free. We'll make sure that you get the link to that. We would love for you to be a part. We want to gain insights that really advance the science of leadership through the lens of well-being. So thank you so much. We will have future webinars, and I hope you can join us then.